Hi, I'm Jerry McLaughlin, host of Special Ops. When you think of famous evangelists and Bible teachers, you think of Billy Graham or D.L. Moody. Well, our guest is Dr. Erwin Lutzer, who is senior pastor of Moody Memorial Church. He was for 36 years. Now he's a book author, many books, including his latest called We Will Not Be Silent. Welcome, Dr. Lutzer.
So glad to be with you today, Jerry.
Hey, I want to ask you a first question. Why did you decide to write this particular book, We Will Not Be Silenced? You've written so many books. What's different about this and what inspired you to write this one?
Well, first of all, let me say that I didn't write this book in order to reclaim the culture. I think it's too late for that. I actually wrote this book to reclaim the church because I think that the church is being silenced. I often say that people are not being talked out of their faith, they are being mocked out of their faith. So, because we fear being vilified because of our stand regarding the Bible, regarding sexuality and other issues, oftentimes the church is very silent. And what we need to do is to realize that even the gospel itself is often co-opted by such things as secular social justice theories and so forth. So we need to think through what all these issues are and then ask this question: how do we respond as Christians to what is going on in the culture? Because, Jerry, there are many people who believe that America cannot really be fixed. It has to be destroyed. Its institutions have to be restored, destroyed, and rebuilt on a secular foundation. So we need to understand that there is an undercurrent here in our country that we need to respond to.
Okay, let's call it out by name. Cultural Marxism. What is cultural Marxism and what are its goals?
Well, when you think about classical Marxism, it was the view that the state was to take over everything, the means of production and so forth, and to bring about a supposed equality. And we know that that resulted in bloody revolutions in Russia and in China. What cultural Marxism says, we can achieve the very same goals, but we can do so incrementally. We can do that if we capture law, if we capture education, if we capture the media, if we vote for the right people. We can incrementally bring about Marxism, and then there won't be a bloody revolution. People will say, this is actually what we want. This is good. So that's the attraction of it. But the same ideas that governed Marx regarding the family, regarding the economy, and of course today it is being applied to racism, all of those same ideas continue. And the influence of Karl Marx, I say that he still rules the world from his grave, and that really is true.
Well, let's talk about another Marxist ruling the world from a grave, Antonio Gramsci. He was the Italian Marxist philosopher, journalist, linguist, etc., who talked about exactly what you're talking about, a kind of boiling a frog slowly, invading a country via culture, through the arts, through the schools, educations, the news media, etc. No need for a bloody coup. You like the frog who was boiled, he didn't know when the boiling started.
Exactly. And of course, that came to America through what was known as the Frankfurt School. And Marxism, therefore, spread to our universities, and it is being taught. One of the reasons I wrote this book, Jerry, is to answer the question that many parents have. Why is it that when we send our children to university, they come back hating America? What is being taught? And the whole point is that there's a form of Marxism that is being taught that's not only related to socialism, but also related to race. And this is so dominant that kids come back thinking that America is really a terrible place.
And that just makes my blood boil, because we are making such progress with racial tensions in America and reconciliation issues and so forth. And not that we're getting political here, but under Trump, he had a lot of Black support. And when he had worked in his business before becoming president, he hired a lot of Hispanic and Black workers, etc. And they speak very highly of him. So many good things were happening in our country. And all of a sudden now it seems like it's going backwards. They have names like Black Lives Matter. And of course, Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter as a group seems a lot more on the line of cultural Marxism or any form of Marxism, maybe a bloodier kind, than it does about Black rights. So, I mean, what's going on? What's behind all this?
Well, there you go. Exactly. Yes. Black lives do matter, including the lives that are lost every weekend here, oftentimes to violence. And Black Lives Matter. Many, of course, Black babies are aborted. But the organization that uses the mantra Black Lives Matter is Marxist, and they admit it to be so. As a matter of fact, this is why also they want to disrupt the nuclear family. People don't understand. Let me just say, Marx believed that the family was a unit of oppression. Men oppressed their wives, children were oppressed by their parents. God was the ultimate oppressor through the church, through the Bible. So his view was, if we take people and we then, liberate them from this oppression, oh my, everybody's going to live together in happiness and so forth. But by locating the real problem externally and not seeing that the problem lies deeper in the human heart, he was misled to a lot of different things that happened. But Black Lives Matter absolutely is Marxist. And it believes that if children are rootless, they are more easily led. And so that's actually what is also happening in our schools, where you have curriculum that are so sexually based. In other words, what you have to do is to throw off all oppression. That means God, the Bible, your parents, and the whole bit.
Well, then cradle to grave, we're completely dependent on the state. And it, I hate to say it, but it looks like we're heading in that direction by the media being censored, Facebook. And hey, I put up something on YouTube, for instance, and I used to get like 2.5 million views on some of my videos. Now I might get 35 views or 100. They're throttling me back. Facebook, the same thing. I would get over 100,000 views. And they just sent me a letter, made no bones about it, said, we disagree with your politics. We are going to block your reach. And so many conservatives and so many Christians are being silenced like that. If we only had a book called We Will Not Be Silenced, we do, your book.
And
Tell us a little
Gary,
bit more about your book, We Will Not Be Silenced. And if you want to, we could talk more about college and universities and other things having to do with Marxism. But I think we made the point. I think the average person understands that completely. We're looking for solutions. And in your case, with your book, spiritual solutions. And I know you have a chapter on free speech as well. So talk about that as well.
well, here's the point. That again also is based on Marx. You know, Herbert Marcuse, who was a Marxist during the 60s, he said outrightly that we cannot have free speech because capitalists will always win the argument. If we want socialists to win, he said that what we have to do is to shut the capitalists down and let the socialists be given free speech. Now, in my book, I actually quote lectures in our universities that say that expressly, that it's time for the LGBTQ community to speak, and those who are opposed should be silent. And to quote one of the authors, double standards are unapologetically called for. In other words, conservatives should not be allowed to speak, only the oppressed should speak. And Jerry, I guess you were not part of the oppressed group, and as a result, you were shut down. So what we have here is something very serious. You know, Frederick Douglass, in a debate, made the point that society exists best when there is free speech. But then he said this, free speech is really the fear of tyrants. That is to say, tyrants hate free speech. And that's one of the first things tyrants want to shut down is free speech. And so that's where we are at, and people are accepting this. I forget the exact statistic that I quote in the book, but many millennials think that free speech should not be allowed. This is terrible. And of course, we have big tech, which, as we know, and you pointed out, censors free speech. But here's what we need to do as Christians. The Bible says in the book of Acts, chapter 4, that when the apostles were beaten and put in prison and told not to speak in the name of Jesus, they said, "We will speak anyway, no matter what you do to us. We cannot help but speaking that which we have seen and heard." And then they gathered together and they prayed and entrusted themselves to God. And what we must do as Christians is to speak. We shouldn't shout. It's not a matter of being judgmental. But we, particularly, I encourage pastors to say, with the words of Martin Luther, "Here we stand, we cannot do otherwise, so help us God." So the question is, are we going to be shamed into silence?
Okay,
And
okay. I think it's coming to me now. If it weren't for double standards, liberals and Marxists and socialists would have no standards at all. And I would like you to address this. What are exactly the goals of the propaganda goals you see right now? Whether somebody's wearing a tag that says, "I am a socialist Marxist," or whether they're just Facebook or YouTube quietly doing what they're doing, censoring speech. Talk about the propaganda, how it's used, how they're not only stopping us from talking with our vocal cords, but also talking with our fingers, typing opinions that are not allowed to be posted because they're called fake news by these big tech tyrants, I'll call them.
in my book, I have an entire chapter on propaganda because I've written a book on Hitler and his view of propaganda. So let's remember what propaganda wants to do. Propaganda has as its goal the shaping of people's reality in such a way that even when faced with a mountain of evidence, they will not change their minds. And so what you have in society are cultural streams. If you're asking about terminology, let me mention Hitler for a moment. He starved children and called it putting them on a low-calorie diet, for example. And the killing of Jews was the cleansing of the land, and on and on. So what you do is you use language to hide very sinister actions. Now, what language is being used today? Oh, the word equality. Equality is being attached to anything people want to promote. For example, you have marriage equality, which is same-sex marriage. You have reproductive equality, which happens to be abortion. And on, people are interested in equality. Well, this is not found in the Bible. By the way, have you noticed that God does not treat people equally? He did not treat Hammurabi as he did Abraham. And Jesus told that story about people who were given talents. One was given 10, the other was given 5, 3, 2, 1. And they were given different talents. And when you have freedom, you may have equality of value, which we certainly believe all people are equal in value. You do not have equality in outcomes. And so what we need to do is to recognize here that the word equality is being terribly misused, just like the word justice. When in Israel, during the days of the judges, when it says that everyone did what was right in his own eyes, it doesn't say everyone did what they thought was evil in their own eyes. To them, they did what was just. But what they believed to be just and right was contrary to God.
Yeah, I think though where the Marxist socialists propaganda comes in a very tricky ways, when you take somebody who ordinarily would not be for the killing of a preborn child, they'll call it choice. And for you to oppose abortion, they'll say you're anti-choice. By saying pro-choice, it's like the snake in the garden saying, "Did God not say not to eat of this fruit of the tree, blah, blah, blah?" Before you know it, Eve is confused. Like, wait a minute. Did he say this? Did he not say it? Double negatives, all this crazy stuff. It actually goes all the way back to the garden, I think. We had a pro-choice tree, and we had a pro-life tree. God never forbade Adam or Eve from eating from the pro-life tree, but they chose. There's something about human nature. You'll choose. They like choice when given a choice. And we've been choosing wrong choices ever since. As you said, they did what was right in their own eyes. And then the propagandists make it easier for them to view it as right by giving these sugar-coated terms, right?
You know, have you ever noticed politicians will say, I believe in a woman's right to choose, and they don't finish the sentence? And everybody knows what they mean, but what do they mean? Do they mean the right to choose making eggs for breakfast or pancakes or this or
Yeah,
that? No, everybody
exactly.
knows because nobody wants to finish the sentence. I believe in a woman's right to choose to kill her preborn baby. Nobody wants to say that. So you're absolutely right. What you do is you camouflage what you want to do under the banner of language and you present it as a noble cause. You know, gay rights, the same sex marriage movement, for example, could have never progressed unless they hitched it to civil rights. It's a civil right. And what they did is they ignored the great natural and cultural issues that are involved, and I might say biblical issues that are involved. But what you do is you couch it under the banner of rights, and it seems so right. But when you dig beneath it, you see what is really the agenda.
Right. I mean, I think I don't know if I have the exact quote. Maybe you have it, but Margaret Thatcher talked about all these freebie goodies, and everybody likes it. It feels good. Yeah, let's go for it. Give me some of that socialism stuff. What was her quote about money? Do you remember?
Oh, yes. And by the way, in my book, I have a chapter on socialism because that is so important. But what she said was this: the problem with socialism is pretty soon you run out of other people's money. And people need to, by the way, Jerry, have you ever noticed why is it that mice get caught in mouse traps? It's because they don't understand why the cheese is free. Now, here's what we need
That's
to
good.
understand.
I gotta remember that.
Here's what we need to understand. Socialists always talk about the division of wealth. How do we divide the wealth? They never talk about creating wealth because socialism cannot create wealth. And that's why in socialist countries, when the government runs out of money, it cannot create wealth. Governments do not create wealth. It is people who work, who have enterprises and businesses that create wealth. When that doesn't happen, what does the government do? It has to create money, and it creates money and creates inflation. I remember when we first went to the Soviet Union, even back in the 1980s, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think I was a millionaire the moment I traded in, 100 American dollars. I forget exactly what the rate of exchange was, but why? It's because when a government runs out of money, it simply creates wealth out of thin air. And by the way, our government is doing that too. But here's
Well,
the
it's a matter of time before fiat money goes inflationary again, and it's not beyond the pale for it to become hyperinflation. People can read more about that in your book, but I want to move on to the chapter you have about sexualization of our children. What is going on in schools right now that parents need to be aware of? And this might be a good time to talk about it because so many parents have had to homeschool their children in one fashion or another because of the pandemic. Is this something that they should just automatically give a blind eye to, let the children go back to school? What are the dangers in some public schools today about sexualization of our children?
even before I begin there, I begin that chapter with these words that even Christian parents today are not raising their children. The culture is. And the cell phone in your child's hand does more to inform his or her worldview than an hour of church or an hour of Sunday school. And people have to recognize that. Now, as far as the schools are concerned, we have here in Illinois, for example, a comprehensive curriculum that is to begin to be taught, I think, in the fourth grade. It introduces students basically to pornography, to various forms of sexuality. And The goal here is, again, to liberate children from that which is traditional, from that which is natural, to normalize the bizarre, to normalize that which is unnatural, and to change their minds about this whole issue of sexuality. And then we get back to what we mentioned before, namely that once kids begin to experiment in this, then you have Planned Parenthood that sets up a clinic close to the school, as is happening oftentimes even in California, because there are certain consequences to what you are teaching them. But the idea is to break the family, because once again, remember that Marx saw it as a unit of oppression. So parents are not supposed to be teaching their children about morality, about the commitment of marriage or normal sexual relationships. Parents are to, their authority is to be, what shall we say, evacuated. That's not exactly the right word, but it is to be set aside for these other things. Now, isn't this interesting that at a time when kids are learning online, some parents are very upset that parents are listening to what their kids are being taught, and the teachers are upset because as long as they have the students in the classroom captive, then of course they can simply teach them whatever they like. But when the parents are looking over their shoulder, parents are finally learning what their kids are really being taught in school. Now, once you begin along this line, as a woman said who was deeply into the lesbian movement, without God in my life, there was no reason for me to say no to anything. So what's coming next? What you find is the throuple. That may be a new word to you, Jerry, but that means marriages in which there are three people. And I understand that's happening in our churches. There may be two men and a woman or the other way, the throuple. But even pedophilia is beginning to be justified, because remember, without God, you really can't say no to anything. So parents need to be warned. If the kids attend a public school, the parents need to keep close tabs on what their children are being taught. As Tony Evans once said, that when their kids came back from school, they would sit them down and deprogram them from what they just learned. Without that, we've lost the next generation, because I quote Hitler, who says, "He who controls the youth controls the future." And by the way, speaking of Hitler, what he told the parents was basically this: you clothe the child, you feed the child, but the heart of the child belongs to the Reich. It belongs to us. And that's what's happening. You feed the child, you clothe the child, but its heart is being captivated by the culture.
Okay, now we'll go from Hitler to radical Islam right now. You have a chapter on how the radical left is teaming up with Islam to destroy America. And I shouldn't say radicalism, it's just plain Islam. Sharia law itself is radical enough. That's the core of Islam belief, which is the antithesis of Christian belief or Judeo-Christian belief. Now, why, nobody seems to be able to answer this for me. Why would the radical left, who would be absolutely against somebody they would consider to be a fascist like Trump, which is really not a fascist at all. They're changing vernacular there. But why would they have somebody like what cozy up with Islam? What Islam is for subjugation. I mean, real enslavement according to Sharia law. Why would the liberal Lucy left want to go with a radical control mechanism of Sharia law and Islam? Are they willing to destroy America at any cost or something? They'll cozy up with anybody?
Jerry, it's because for the time being, they have the same agenda, namely the destruction of Christianity and the destruction of capitalism. So the left sees Islam as a battering ram, so to speak, against Christianity and against capitalism. And that's why you never find the left criticizing, that I know of, Islam's treatment of women. They're entirely silent. And what you have, even though Islam, radical Islam, seeks cultural dominance, what you find is the fact that people ignore that and they move on. Now, eventually they have very different worldviews we have to understand. But for now, what does it say in war? That the enemy of
Of
my
my
enemy is
enemy.
my friend.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that. Now, in the book, I actually give illustrations where Islam is being taught in our schools. And when parents object, the parents are vilified. You're homophobic, you're Islamophobic, you are intolerant, and so forth. In fact, our tax dollars are being used to build prayer chapels or prayer rooms for Muslim students in our schools. Could you imagine if Christians insisted that there be a prayer room built for Christians? Boy, we'd hear from the ACLU, but the ACLU is quiet because remember, the goal is the destruction of Christianity and the destruction of capitalism. And if Islam can help to do that, the liberals are on their side.
Wow. One final question. In your final chapter of your book, We Will Not Be Silenced, it was based upon the words of, I'll say, Yahusha, or some Jews would say Yeshua. More of a Greek name would be Jesus, more popular in the United States. So, what would he say? I mean, it was the final chapter in your book, and also I believe the final chapter in the 66th book of the Bible, in the book of Revelation. Jesus said to the church of Sardis, "Strengthen what remains." What do you think he meant by that, and what would he be saying to the church today, or 2,000 years almost since then, and maybe it's not applicable today? What's your opinion on that?
I think it's very applicable. The problem with the church in Sardis is they no longer saw the world as their enemy and they caved into the culture. And I want to say a word of encouragement too about that church. But Rebecca and I, my wife and I, have been to Sardis. There are no churches there, there are only mosques. That's a separate story. But isn't it interesting that up against pagan temples where there was pagan sexuality, there were ancient churches. Now, they were after the time of Christ. But here's a question, Jerry. Did they build a church next to a pagan temple in order to reach those pagans for Christ and to say, we want to be where it is darkest so we can win this battle against darkness? Or did they feel comfortable next to the pagan temples? And I think they felt comfortable next to the pagan temples. Now, in the book, I actually delineate what I think Jesus would say to us today. It has to do with issues of sexuality. It has to do with the gospel itself and not confuse it with social justice, which is happening in so many evangelical churches. And then finally, Jesus would say something to us about the culture. So I don't speak on behalf of Jesus, but this is consistent with scripture. And I think Jesus would say to us today, strengthen what remains. Now, here's a word of encouragement. It's very interesting that in that letter in the book of Revelation to Sardis, Jesus says, but there are some of you in the church who have not soiled your garments, and you will walk with me in white because you are worthy. So not everyone in that church succumbed to the culture. And I would like to think that in the American church today, there's still many believers who have not succumbed to the culture, but are continuing to uphold the standards of God's word. And my burden, of course, is for the church to be the church and not back down out of fear of ridicule or anything else, but to let people know where we stand, always gospel driven to be sure, but at the same time, not simply becoming silent because of the cultural streams that are swirling around us.
Absolutely. We need to be salt and light to a lost and dying world because we have the solution to this. Now, your book is called We Will Not Be Silenced, Responding Courteously to Our Culture's Assault on Christianity. Tell us where we can get that book.
Well, you can go to Amazon or you can go to your local bookstore. And I trust that as you read it, that you will be motivated to see the importance of the church at this critical hour. We will not be silenced, responding courageously to our culture's assault on Christianity.
Excellent. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Everybody, this has been Dr. Erwin Lutzer. He was pastor of Moody Memorial Church for 36 years, named after the famous D.L. Moody, Dwight L. Moody. And it's a pleasure indeed. We got to talk again. Got to get that book, got to read it. Thank you.
Thanks and God bless.